Hey guys, it's Libby and welcome to an unusual mid-month wrap-up for this October. Normally I am a one wrap-up per month type of gal, but I am kind of crushing it this month, and I do not want my end-of-month wrap-up to be an hour and a half long, so I'm gonna break it into two pieces. I've read 13 books in the first 15 days of October. And I am aware it is possible that I will read 0 books in the last 16 days of October, so, you know, maybe I'm totally screwing myself. Maybe this just also is my October wrap-up. But hopefully I will be able to keep up my current pace, or at least a usual pace for me. So far I have read 6 novels, one of which was a DNF, 5 plays, 1 short story collection, and 1 novella, and 2 of those works were in French. And a lot of this was Victober reading, but not exclusively. So let us start off with the first thing I finished, which was, forgotten already, Semi-Detached Couple by Emily Eden. We started off with a bang. I totally loved this book. This was published in 1860, though it was written in 1829, so it was Victorian in its reception, if not its conception. And it was so much fun. It's about this couple who get married in the first couple chapters of the book. And, you know, it seems like it's not really working out between them. He seems to like her a lot more than she likes him. But we also are surrounded by, like, all of their family and friends and neighbors and also their servants. We get to see a little bit from the lady's maid's perspective. So while the problematic marriage is sort of the core of the story, there's lots of subplots going on. And reading this book feels like you have been invited to a fancy house party and you're just like listening in at all of these keyholes. It was completely delightful, very funny. Jane Austen fans will love it. Highly recommend. 5 stars. So of course I also read Emily Eden's other novel, The Semi-Detached House, which was published in 1859 and also written in like 1858, 1859. So, you know, maybe she didn't have as much time to think about it and revise it, because this somehow was very similar but just not quite as good. The premise here is a newly married and fairly newly pregnant couple is moving into a semi-detached house, which is like a duplex. So you've got, you know, one large house with a division down the middle. And the wife is sort of concerned about what it will be like to live in a semi-detached house and have these other people like right on top of you. The idea here is very similar. There's not a particularly heavy plot thread, but we just hear about the new couple and their semi-detachments, or their neighbors, and, you know, other family and friends. It just, the wit and the humor was not quite as glittering in a sort of ineffable way. And also, since there was a little plot, it was kind of hard to follow, but I think one of the plot points revolves around a bunch of people being swindled by a Jew, which was kind of not great. So this one I gave 3 stars. Then I did something that I try to avoid, which is that I read a book in bad faith. I picked it up expecting to not like it. Now, I know other people don't feel as averse to doing this as I do, and I've even heard some people on BookTube say that, like, they want their average rating to be a 3 or a 3.5 or a 4 star, like they don't want to be reading excellent books all of the time. I do not understand this opinion at all. I would like to be constantly dazzled and amazed and awestruck by all of the books that I'm reading. That is the goal. I usually do not get there, but that is the goal. So I picked this up because of my depression. I have depression, which is sort of augmented by seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. So I have mild depression year-round, and in the winter, when there's less sunlight, my body sort of goes into hibernation and the depression symptoms get more intense. I do have a lamp, a sun lamp, which like simulates sunlight, and so I just stare into that for 20 minutes every morning, and it helps. And since I've moved from the 44th parallel to the 52nd parallel, it has gotten worse. And I didn't move to any old 52nd parallel. I moved to the 52nd parallel on the North Sea, where it is just gray all the time. Like September 1st, the clouds move in and they do not go away until April, May. So even when the sun is still shining a fair bit like it is in October, I can show you the outside. There's still a lot of cloud cover, so I'm not really getting the sweet, sweet rays of the life-giving sun. And so in the fall, winter, and early spring, I tend to sleep more, I get less excited about things, it becomes harder for me to feel joy. I think a lot of people associate depression with sadness, because that's how the word depression is used colloquially. But when I feel depressed, I normally don't feel sad. Sometimes I feel sad. But mostly I just feel nothing, and I feel no motivation. And I can't get interested in things. So normally what I want to do is lie in bed doing nothing. However, that is really boring. And, I have enough desire to know that I don't want to be bored. But I also knew that I didn't want to read a book that I thought I would like, because the depression would just drag it down and make it harder to like. So I chose a book that I thought I would not like, which is The Monster of Elendhaven by Jennifer Giesbrecht. I'm gonna go full Dutch here. Now, I, like probably most of you, do not keep a list of books that I don't want to read, so I just picked this because it was the most recent book I had looked at and dismissed. I think I heard about it in a Tor.com newsletter or article. This is a Tor.com novella. It's 160 pages, which in my book just pushes it into the novel category. So yeah, I had looked at it. I thought maybe it would be something I would be into, but the reviews were not particularly good. And I read the first page and I was like, nah, I don't want that. But then, a couple days later, I was like, yes, actually, this is the book that I need right now. So I did not particularly like this book. However, I was not going to like any book that I read at this point in time, so take my review with a grain of salt. However, I think there are still plenty of bad things about it. So this is set in a fantasy world which has magic and gods, probably, which is sort of Germanically, culturally influenced. Gentlemen are referred to as Herr, whatever their last name is, and a lot of the place names are Germanic. But it's very far north, I think on an island, and it's also very cold. It snows for like 10 months out of the year. So that was kind of helpful to me in my depression. I was like, yes, darkness and grit and doom, that is what I'm all about right now. I don't want to see any people being happy. Fuck those people being happy. And we've got two main characters, Johan, who is basically Slender Man. He's very tall and oddly proportioned and pale and good at sneaking right up behind people and murdering them. He's very silent and stealthy. And he sort of becomes obsessed with a guy who runs an accounting firm named Florian, because he thinks Florian is a sorcerer. And magic is bad and you're not supposed to do magic in this world. So Florian is trying to hide it, but Johan wants to sort of extort Florian into finding out who/what Johan is, because Johan understands that he's not a normal human, and so he can blackmail Florian by saying, I'll let people know you're a sorcerer if you don't help me, and also Florian has the magical skills to figure out what's up with Johan. Yeah, so that's how their relationship starts, and then it just becomes super murdery, and they've got this whole plot to kill a bunch of people in a really terrible way. So let's start by talking about the world building, which I thought was where a lot of the problems lay. Initially, this is what I noticed with the phonology. The phonology of several of the important names here is unbelievable. Let's start with Elendhaven, which is the name of the town where all of this is taking place. Try saying the word Elendhaven 50 times in a row. Your voice is not going to do that. It's really hard to make an NDH sound, one right after the other. If this was a real town that had existed for, the hundreds of years that it has existed, people are either going to end up calling it Elendhaven or Elendhaven or something easier. One of those consonants is going to get dropped. Then Florian's last name is Leichenbloom, which is also difficult to pronounce, Leichenbloom. It's either going to turn into Lichenbloom or Leichenbloom. if you say it over and over again over the centuries. Also, the main drink here seems to be vodka, which was kind of clashing with all of the Germanicness with it. I kept thinking, like, where is the beer? Surely someone is going to drink a beer instead of this Russian beverage. Another language thing that, like, I thought could have been put to good use, but was not incorporated into this book at all, was that Germanic languages, German and Dutch, use a lot of diminutives. So, you know, if you add chen or line to the end of a German word, or ja or etje to the end of a Dutch word, it means like little version of that thing. And I thought there were so many opportunities where diminutives could have been put to good use in the vocabulary of the characters, but it was not, so that was a bit of a disappointment. Then let's move on to some of the places where I think the editor needed to step in. We've got this one sentence: Florian's eyes were the color of light split through a glass of vodka. What does that mean? I have no idea what color his eyes are. I could either go with the fact that the light's being split, so his eyes are rainbow, in which case, if you have a character with rainbow eyes, you need to make that more clear. Or his eyes are literally clear, like vodka. And I don't think his eyes are clear either. This sentence was not helpful. Then we've got the sentence, Johann blinked back, expression rictus. Rictus is not an adjective, it is a noun. And finally, I want to talk about the ethics of this book. So Johann and Florian are like kind of in love/lust with each other. And I think the book wants you to be rooting for their relationship, but it does not address the fact that they are murderers. They kill a lot of people, Johann casually, Florian brutally. And, you know, it's hard to root for that kind of a person. Florian does have a backstory which I think is meant to garner sympathy for him. However, there is a major plot hole in his backstory. It just like, there is no way, given that set of information, that people would react the way that they did. So yeah, that ended up being a negative for the book instead of a positive. Yeah, so there were just a lot of problems I had. A lot of other reviews that I read said similar things. They also mentioned that they found the book, other reviewers mentioned that they found the book incredibly violent and like gross. I have a fairly strong stomach for these things, but I have to say I was not really fazed at all by any of the gross body stuff. So unless you're very sensitive to like flesh diseases or blood everywhere, I wouldn't urge you to stay away from this book, but equally if you want to read it to get some blood and guts thrills, this is not going to deliver those to you. So I gave this book 2 stars. I would say that if things about this sound appealing to you, if what you really want is a historical fantasy set in a very cold northern Europe with lots of death and a bit of sadomasochistic sex, just read Deathless by Catherine M. Villette, because this is like a much better version of what Monsters of Elendhaven was kind of doing. Okay, moving on to the next thing I finished. This was also for Victober. It was the audiobook of Villette by Charlotte Bronte. Now, Villette and my experience with it is partially responsible for me reading The Monsters of Elendhaven. Villette, many people read as being about a depressed woman, and yeah, I think that was part of what sort of sent me into my depression spiral. I have like sort of mild to moderate depression the whole time during the winter, but sometimes, certain things will happen, or sometimes I just don't even know why, and for sort of 1 to 4 days, I will end up in, the dregs of just lying there doing nothing. I'm never suicidal, don't worry about me, because suicide sounds like it would involve like doing something, which just is really not what I'm in the mood for. But jumping back to the 1840s, or was this 50s, with Villette. So Lots of people are reading Villette for October / have read it in the past, so, you know, I assume you already know what it is about. Young woman, parents don't particularly seem to be in the picture, ends up going to La Basse-Cour, which one is to read as Belgium, in order to become a teacher, and she just sort of leaves everything behind. I mean, she doesn't really have anything. She just, and, you know, I feel like I should really relate to this book because it's about a depressed 20-something who decides there is nothing for her back home and just leaves, drops everything and moves to the Low Countries. Yes. I understand you, Lucy Snow. She even has the same initials as me. I know that some people like this book more than Jane Eyre. I think I do prefer Jane Eyre, mainly because I know that I like Jane Eyre, and I really don't know how I feel about Villette. This was on my TBR because Amanda Center's varying opinions of Villette sort of made me want to reread it. And yeah, I understand why Amanda has such varying opinions, because it's an odd book. Lucy is very reserved, hides lots of things, doesn't like to talk about herself. Yeah, so I just don't really know how I feel about this book. I do enjoy the reading experience for the most part, except when it makes me very depressed. But yeah, is this like a good book? I don't know. Meh. 4 stars. And the next thing I finished was The Importance of Being Earnest, the play, which is the group read for October, one of the group reads by Oscar Wilde. Now, I had already seen the film with some people, Rupert Everett, Reese Witherspoon, Judi Dench, Colin Firth, Frances O'Connor. And so I already knew very well what I was getting into. You know, it's a fine, fun time. It's very frivolous and very silly, and, you know, maybe too frivolous and silly for its own good. It's about a man named Jack who, you know, he's a rich British guy, so he has a house in the country, but he also spends a fair amount of time in London. And he's discovered that it is very convenient to go by an alias when he is in London, so he goes by Earnest, and whenever he's in the country and he wants to go to London, he says he has to go deal with some problem that his brother Earnest has caused. His friend Algernon Moncrief, damn, that's a Wildean name, hears about this, learns that he has this sort of alias, and decides that having an alias is actually a rather convenient thing. And so he decides to go be Earnest for a bit, and it really messes with all of their love lives. Fun, but not profound, so 4 stars. So I moved on from there to something more profound, and that is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. So this was my second Gaskell novel, though I had also read some of her short works, which honestly did not particularly impress me, and I mainly remember being disappointed by Wives and Daughters when I read it last October. I did like it. I gave it 4 stars, but I know a lot of other people really love it, and so I really wanted to love it too, and I'd also already seen the miniseries, which I thought was great. And so the book was kind of a letdown, mainly because the main character seems to not really like any of the other characters except for her dad for a good portion of the beginning of the book, which made it hard for me to like and want to know about any of the other characters. And also the book did not seem to know what the interesting points of its plot were, and so the sort of build-up and payoff wasn't quite working out. I'm very glad to say that I did not experience any of those problems with North and South. I really like the characters. My favorite is Mrs. Thornton, our leading man's mom. I could listen to her talk all day. And also the setup and payoffs worked out a lot. And also I think the setups and payoffs worked out a lot better, which is interesting because I would associate that with being a sign of maturity, like that's something you get better at the more books you write, but Wives and Daughters was written after North and South, so meh. I think literally everyone is reading this for October, so you don't need me to tell you what it's about. It's about the difference between the North and the South of England. I gave this 5 stars. I really, really, really liked it. That does not necessarily mean that it is perfect. There were some moments in the sort of the way that the conflict between the mill workers and the mill owners was presented, which seemed a bit sort of peachy and naive to me in my late capitalist lifestyle. I would believe that it worked better on its original delivery, but also I would equally believe that, you know, there is still some naivete about economics that would have been noted even by a Victorian reader. So North and South, 5 stars, very glad to have read it, so that I need not give up hope in Elizabeth Gaskell, who I know is a very popular author. Then I didn't so much finish so much as finally abandon La Dame aux Camellias by Alexandre Dumas fils. This is the son, not the father, so he did not write Count of Monte Cristo, The Three Musketeers, The Black Tulip. This is I think La Dame aux Camellias is Dumas fis's most famous work. You may also know him for the Nutcracker, which is actually a rewrite of an E.T.A. Hoffmann version of the Nutcracker. Now, I am pretty sure that you already know the plot of this story. It has been adapted many times and in many different mediums. The sort of most famous film adaptation, I think, is from Golden Age of Hollywood, starring Greta Garbo. It is called Camille. Many English translations or adaptations end up calling this Camille because the Lady of the Camellias doesn't sound quite as good as La Dame aux Camellias. It has been turned into a ballet twice, one called Marguerite and Armand and the other called La Dame aux Camellias, which is excellent and what really made me want to read the book because I love that ballet so much. And it is also the main source for the plot in Moulin Rouge. The sort of setting and aesthetics of Moulin Rouge are more based on La Bohème, the other opera about people who don't have a lot of money in Belle Epoque Paris. But the plot is 100% La Dame aux Camellias. If you have somehow managed to avoid all of these adaptations, the plot, when we finally get to it in the book, is about a young man named Armand who falls completely in love with a demi-mondaine named Marguerite. He can't really afford to keep her as his mistress, so he becomes her lover, but she also has to have other lovers in order to pay the rent. And this causes some friction between them, and also she's dying of tuberculosis because Belle Epoque France. So yeah, that's the story. And it's not a spoiler to say that she dies at the end because the whole story is told as a flashback. And so basically every adaptation, you know, the Armand is sad and alone. And, you know, he's talking about how bad he feels about his love life. So I DNF'd this book when I came to a certain realization. And that is, for a lot of the time when I was reading this, I didn't want to pick it up. And I thought that it's because I was reading it in the original French, and since French is not my native language, it's harder for me to understand. I have to look up about 1 word per page, and so, you know, it's just a slower reading experience and a more laborious, sort of brain-intensive reading experience than reading in English. But eventually I realized that it's just that I don't like any of the characters. So yeah, I gave up at about 52%. The first quarter of the book is all pre-flashback, which I thought was way too much time. We meet a guy who I think is supposed to be representing Alexandre Dumas himself, and I think the other characters are sort of loosely referencing people that he knew. So, you know, he's talking about, I'm just this guy, I do things, I went to an auction of some furniture once and I found a book that I bought because why not, and then this one kid came up to me and he was looking not so good and he was like, I really need that book. And then he faints, and our narrator has to sort of take care of Armand, and then we go exhume Marguerite's body, and it's weird. And then we finally get the backstory of Armand and Marguerite's love story. This whole section is either cut or significantly reduced in all of the adaptations, which is the right move. when I started reading, I knew the plot, and I actually honestly thought that our sort of unnamed narrator was Armand, and I was like, ooh, this is very interesting. He's introducing us to Marguerite in this very distant way. You know, he's saying like, oh, I knew her vaguely. I would see her driving her carriage in the Bois sometimes, and I was like, so we're going to like gradually see increasing intimacy in the storytelling in addition to like increasing intimacy in their actual relationship. No, that's not what's happening. Armand is a different character. So yeah, really, I just did not like either Marguerite or Armand. Armand falls in love with this lady without ever having talked to her, which is not great. He's totally obsessed with her, but he gets mad at her a lot. He spends a lot of time being mad at her. And Marguerite, I don't believe that she would ever actually exist. I don't believe that a person would ever be in this situation. So she basically has a sugar daddy who gives her lots and lots of money. So she, at one point, was on sort of to get some good air into her lungs to help with her tuberculosis. She was at the seaside, and there was a duke there with his daughter, and the daughter died, and Marguerite sort of looked like the daughter or reminded the duke of the daughter, and so he said, you know, I want to sort of adopt you and, you know, give you lots of money as like a way for me to continue showing my care to my daughter by helping someone else, which, you know, is a bit odd and fortunate, but I'll buy it. But then Marguerite, even though she's getting wads of cash every month, still lives in Paris, works as a demi-mondaine, which is like, it's different than being a mistress because you are sort of only associated with one person. If you're a demi-mondaine, you have several lovers and you generally like keep your own house. So I guess it's kind of like being a call girl, but you also have like a much more important role in society. So you go to the opera a lot. So Marguerite, we learn, needs to have all of these other lovers in addition to Armand because she can't afford her lifestyle even with all of this money that she's getting from the Duke. Like, she can't afford to keep her house and her carriage and her box at the opera. And we also learn that she hates living in Paris and she hates having all of these other lovers. And I'm like, just move to a small house by the sea, which will, one, make you happier, B, you can actually afford it, and C, like, Marguerite, I want to slap you. What are you doing? It doesn't make any sense. Oh, one thing that I did notice while reading this book, which is kind of relevant to October, is how sort of prudish I have become in my expectations of 19th century literature based on the English and American things that I've read. You know, I was shocked that in chapter 1 we were talking about abortion. And I was like, oh my, you would not find this in the Anglosphere. So that initially intrigued me. However, everything else, boring. If you want to know how people talked about abortion in the 19th century, read only chapter 1 of La Dame aux Camellias. Anyway, let's go back to jolly old England with Thomas Hardy. This is the complete poems. I did not read the complete poems. That would have taken a bit too long. I read Poems of the Past and Present, which is this section of his book. He wrote, I don't know, like 9 volumes of poetry. This is a collection that was not really originally meant to go together. It's just sort of various poems from various times in his life that got published in, I think, 1901. So it started out fairly boring. The first half I didn't love. Some of them I skipped when I realized we were not really going anywhere with them. There's a fair number of poems about, like, architecture, and I just do not understand the point of poems about architecture. Like, the architecture is the poetry, and you just look at it. That is the correct response to architecture. Writing a poem about it. I mean, if you personally want to write a poem about it, you should do that. However, I don't understand the point of me reading the poem you wrote about some architecture. But then in the second half, we moved into stuff that is sort of more similar to his novels. One of them is actually called, what was it called? Like Tess's Lament or something. And it is like a poem from the perspective of Tessa the D'Urbervilles at the end of the book. So that was interesting. I did not think that poem was good. And I think, you know, just let the book speak for itself. But there were several other ones that I did think were interesting. And he also wrote a bit about religion, which I think is interesting because Thomas Hardy didn't really know what he thought about religion. And so you can sort of see that in these books, in these poems. So I would give this one a 3.5. Yeah, I'd earlier read Thomas Hardy's Wessex poems, which I think is a better place to start if you're moving from the novels to the poetry, because those are all more like his novels. Oh my god, I'm glad I'm doing this video in 2 parts because I feel like I've already been talking so long. We're moving on to more Thomas Hardy. Hooray! I reread The Woodlanders by Thomas Hardy, which I had previously cited as my favorite Thomas Hardy. Yeah, I still really don't know. I need to also reread Jude the Obscure. And maybe Far From the Madding Crowd. I think maybe the fact that everybody else likes Far From the Madding Crowd so much has made me feel like I like it less, because like there's already so much love. Does it need more of mine? I don't know, but it's been a while since I've read it, so I'm probably just wrong here. The Woodlanders is about 5-ish people who are all from like really distinct social spheres. We've got Marty South, who is kind of living in poverty. Giles Winterbourne, who is sort of laborer. He does a lot of like cider making and apple tree planting. It's a very apple-y area where they are. We've got Grace Melbury, whose father is a merchant and like maybe slightly more elevated than Giles Winterbourne, but the daughter Grace is even more elevated because she has got like a proper education, because her father wanted to make Grace into a real prize catch so that he could then give her to Giles Winterbourne to make himself feel better for the fact that he stole the true love of Giles's father. To be his wife. Then we've got Dr. Edred Fitzpiers, who is a doctor who rather startles all of the provincial country folk in Little Hintock by like reading sort of metaphysical books, which weirds them all out. So he's a professional man. And then we have Felice Charmand, who is a widow, but still fairly young, and she is a member of the gentry, so she, lives in a nice house. She owns Giles's property, and, everybody is sort of in love with a person one rank above them, and we somehow end up with the marriage that makes the fewest people happy. I do still think it's really great, and the end will like totally tear your heart out, and the end is very Hardy. Oh man, the irony and the tragedy and the life. Did someone make a video about Victorian literature making you depressed? I think I must have hallucinated this video, because I really feel like someone on sort of Classics BookTube talked about, I thought there was a whole video dedicated to this. Maybe someone talked about it in like response to a question in a Q&A, but like, does Victorian literature make you depressed? How did you deal with that? That sort of stuff. Yeah, if this video exists, please send me a link to it. If this video does not exist, please make it. So that was still 5 stars for The Woodlanders. Now the last 4 things I have are plays, and 3 of them are by Oscar Wilde. So first we've got An Ideal Husband, which I had seen the film of with Kate Blanchett and Jeremy Northam and Rupert Everett again, and I'd also seen it on stage. So our central couple is Lord and Lady Chiltern, and into their lives comes a Mrs. Cheveley who has some dirt on Lord Chiltern based on like how he made his money in the past, and she is going to use this to blackmail him into doing something that is financially advantageous for her, because he is a member of Parliament, and he really doesn't want to do this because he thinks what she's asking him to support is unethical, but he also doesn't want to be found out. So it's about sort of the conflict between them, and Mrs. Cheveley also has some blackmail material on other people. I think that this is an interesting play. I am sad that I read it though, because in both of the adaptations I've seen, they take out some of like the rather chauvinistic stuff, which was kept in, which was obviously there in the original play about like, this is the sort of thing that a woman is supposed to do, and this is the sort of thing that a man is supposed to do, and of course a woman is like supposed to support the man. And I was like, Oscar Wilde, you are gay. How could you be so gender essentialist at me? Ugh. So 3 stars for An Ideal Husband. And then I followed that up with A Woman of No Importance, which was the other group read for Victober. Our central character here is Mrs. Arbuthnot, who has a son who's just gotten a post as a secretary for, a big wig, who Mrs. Arbuthnot knows is his father, who had refused to marry her. And so she really does not want her son going off to work for his father, who she thinks is a terrible person. This definitely had potential to be interesting. I know Katie said that this was like so great because of the like feminist attitudes in it, which are there and are interesting, but I thought so many of the plot points were very dull and conventional, so there was really nothing in the story to get excited about. And the whole time that I was reading this, I could not stop thinking that Henrik Ibsen's Ghosts is like the version of this play, but better. The stakes are way higher. The plot is more believable, but also more inventive. So yeah, I would recommend reading Ghosts, but if you want to read A Woman of No Importance, that's also fine. I gave it 3 stars. At this point, I think reading 3 Oscar Wilde plays back to back was maybe not the best idea, because he reuses phrases. I heard, 2, 3, maybe 4 phrases that had been recycled from play to play, which was a bit disappointing. Because like, oh yeah, that joke again. Hello, joke, how are you doing? Then next up was the Bard Book Club play, which this month is Comedy of Errors. This is gonna get a whole video about it, so I will shut up about it for now, so we can move on to the final thing that I read in the first 15 days of October, which was Salome by Oscar Wilde. I did read this in the original French, and man, it was weird and not good. It's about Salome, who is famous for demanding of her stepfather, King Herod, the head of John the Baptist. I couldn't tell if this play was a joke. I don't think it was, but the things people do are ridiculous. I know the original story kind of, but not enough to know if this is like all just based on stuff that is actually in the Bible. If it's not, then why are you putting weird stuff in your play? If it is, then just don't adapt it, because it's a weird, bad story. And there's also like a totally ridiculous moment where this one character slips and falls and dies. For not really any reason. How many times does slipping and falling result in your death? Very rarely. It was a very odd moment. And also the language was strange. I don't know if that's because he was writing in not his native language, if he was trying to make it sound old-timey. Man, this play was weird. 2 stars. So that was the first half of October. A couple of diamonds, but mostly rough, I think. And thank you guys very much for watching. I'll see you again for probably Comedy of Errors will be my next video. Bye!